Hello, and the purpose of this video is to continue the discussion on Marxism versus anarcho-capitalism, right? So this is part 1b of this series of video, the 4 videos. I think it's going to be 4 videos in which I'm going to be discussing this topic. The article that appeared in Marxism number 36, and this is the theoretical quarterly of the International Marxist Tendency. It's called In Defense of Marxism, and it's called Marxism versus Libertarianism. I've changed the title to Marxism versus Anarcho-Capitalism because Libertarianism, as a sui generis term, also covers the Chicago School of Economics. And the Chicago School of Economics is not anarcho-capitalist. The Chicago School of Economics is minarchist. So, there is a difference between minarchism and anarcho-capitalism. And the Austrian school is anarcho-capitalism, not minarchist. So, it's two separate things here. Chicago School and Austrian school are two separate things, right? So that's why I changed the name to Marxism versus anarcho-capitalism, which is specifically focusing on the Austrian school, to the exclusion of Chicago School of Economics minarchism, which is something else. Right. So explaining now what are the theoretical article explains what are the main features of the labor theory of value of Karl Marx. Number one, it is not individual labor time, but socially necessary labor time that makes commodities valuable. The average time required to produce a commodity for the market, given historical and technological conditions, right? And this is one feature of Karl Marx that is good, that I agree with. That industrial production of commodities or supply of services exists within a given historical and technological historical context and given technological conditions, right? So you have to consider technological factors and historical context when you analyze production of commodities or supply of services, right? So basically, the labor theory of value posits that extraction of surplus value is a source of profit, and surplus value is unpaid labor of the unpaid labor of the working class. So, capitalists purchase not labor but labor power, and this is one of the main things about Marxist theory that needs to be understood. It's an obscure fact that is not generally known, but capitalists purchase not labor but labor power, okay? And hourly work, all right? Work that is paid by the hour, right? And what happens is that the worker produces more value than they are paid back in the form of wages. So there is a difference. What the capitalist makes from selling the good or service is greater than what he pays the worker in wages, right? So the worker is only getting a fraction of the value of their labor, whether they're supplying a service or manufacturing a product, right? That's the main criticism of Marxism, as espoused in the labor theory of value. And another complaint of Marxism against the Austrian school type of capitalism is that the crisis of overproduction. The workers can never afford to buy back the commodities that they produce, right? So let's say that a worker works in a factory that manufactures luxury cars, luxury sports cars like a Porsche or a Lamborghini or whatever. It is probably the case that worker is not going to be able to afford buying the car that he's manufacturing, right? So, yeah. But anyways, yeah. So there is a difference, Marxist, because what this theoretical article is saying is that when the Austrian school criticizes Marxism, they misrepresent Marxism, because they ignore that in Marxism there is a difference between labor and labor power and value and price, right? The concept of value and the concept of price in Marxism are two separate things. Value does not equal price, right? And labor does not equal labor power, right? So labor is more potential, whereas labor power is applied. and quantified. Another complaint that Marxists make is that monopolies and cartels create distortions. See, because anarcho-capitalists only say that the state is the only thing that creates distortions. The state, the actions of politicians, the central bank, or labor unions, those actors create distortion. But Marxists add is not, well, if you're going to complain that those actors create distortion, then you have to also include monopolies and cartels, right? Corporate monopolies and corporate cartels. The distortion created by private power, right? By private accumulations of power, who are as powerful as a state. Many of these multinational corporations are as powerful or more powerful than many states. So that has to be factored, like the impact of corporate monopolies and cartels, right? Which also create market distortions. So yeah, and another criticism of the marginal utility theory is that it looks only at prices. So the joke goes that advocates of marginal utility theory, quote, know the price of everything and the value of nothing, right, end quote. So that's because in Marxism there is a difference between price and value, right? Price does not always reflect value. And according to Marxists, capitalists take advantage of that, right? Because the price might be less, the price of the worker's labor power might be less than the value of it when it comes to like selling the service or product that worker is supplying or manufacturing, right? So right. Anyways, the marginal utility theory maintains that it is the satisfaction of the wants of the consumer that matters for value, not the labor required for production. So, according to the marginal utility theory, it doesn't matter how much labor you put into the manufacture of a product or the supply of a service. If there is no demand for it, your labor is meaningless and has no value, right? So this is called subjective utility. The usefulness of to the consumer determines the value of the commodity or service. So for a commodity or service to have value, it has to be useful to the consumer, and then that usefulness is what motivates demand for that product, right? Subjective utility. Now that's another misconception about Marxism, according to this article, because the article claims that Marx understood that if a commodity or service is of no use to anyone, then it can't be sold. As a result, such a commodity has no exchange value, no price, and it is worthless. So Marx understood that, right? However, and this is my own viewpoint, because I am versed in both the marginal utility theory and the labor theory of value. I look at both, and I also look at the environmental, the environmental the criticism coming from radical environmentalism against both marginal utility theory and the labor theory of value, that it doesn't factor the environmental drag cost of industrial production. Okay, I factor all three, right? But I would say that both the marginal utility theory and the labor theory of value are partially correct, because on the one hand, like as Marx pointed out, if a commodity or service is of no use to anyone, then it can't be sold, right? So, obviously, there has to be demand for the commodity or service for it to have a value. However, in order to supply that service or manufacture that commodity, you need somebody to do that, right? Somebody's going to have to do the work. So you need workers, right? Commodities and services are not going to supply themselves. You need workers, and workers have to be paid wages, and those wages need to be adequate, and they need to be enough that the worker will be motivated to do a quality job. Because if you're a capitalist and you pay your workers, very little, like if you don't pay your workers enough or whatever, or if those workers are not going to be as productive as a worker that is well paid, right? So I believe that it's in the interest of the capitalists to pay their workers, a living wage. That's my viewpoint. I don't know. So that then you can have quality and productivity, right? So that the worker can feel motivated to, do a quality job. That worker has to be paid adequately. Otherwise, he will do a mediocre job, or he will do the work while looking for somebody else, right? So, and then he will drop you and go for where he gets better paid, right? So you will lose workers, and that will create instabilities in your business. So it's in the interest of the capitalists to pay the workers a living wage, I think. But on the other hand, there has to be demand for the product, for that product to have, or service to have value, right? So you need both input of labor and demand for the service or commodity to have value. And then overall you have to factor in the environmental drag cost of industrial production, and economic activity, and that has to be factored into the cost of services and commodities in the market, so that then you can pay for environmental cleanup, right, of pollution. And but that's something separate. That is not market distorting. I don't believe that's market distorting, because if you allow for pollution to be if you allow for the environmental drag cost that comes from industrial production to be unchecked, that in itself will become a much greater market distortion. Okay, because if you cannot breathe the air or drink the water, or if the soil is dead, you are not really going to be able to have sort of the quality of life that you would want. So I mean, what is the point of living in a world like that? You could have a perfectly efficient market in context of an environmentally dead world. I don't think that's something that is desirable, right? So right. And let's see. Right. And again, the whole issue that production of commodities takes place within given historical and technological conditions. This is one of the fundamental premises of Marxism that is right on. I agree 100% with that. And maybe the Austrian school doesn't look at this, the historical context and the technological conditions, because, marginal, the anarcho-capitalists don't really look at history, not really. Or they look at history, but not in the sense of like, they don't look at the history of political economy in terms of applied political economy in the sense of economics modes of production. They assume that the market has always been there or something, And in a way they're right, because for example, they point to like Phoenicia, ancient Phoenicians, merchants and whatever. Merchants have been around since the beginning of time, right? Since the beginning of civilized life. And civilization is defined as a city-based society and economy. So as long as there have been city-based societies and economies, there has been merchants. That's what anarcho-capitalists say. So merchants have been around all over. And as long as merchants have been around, there has been a market, right? But however, though, I would say that there is a case to be made that there are certain economic modes of production, because, for example, in the ancient era, there was the slave trade. There was slavery, right? Which isn't the case now. Now there is wage labor. So there has been a change in the economic mode of productions, in the way that, economics happens, and also the way the markets happen. And this issue of technological conditions, I mean, back in the time of the Phoenicians, a lot of the trade, in the market, you could barter things. Like you could trade things. You didn't need. They used money, but money wasn't the only thing. You could also go to the market and barter, not just pay with money, but barter. You could do both. Whereas now, you cannot barter anymore. If you go to a shop, you cannot barter you have to pay with money only. And now it's electronic money. They're moving towards electronic money. Cash is being phased out, at least here in Sweden. So, yeah, there is technological conditions and historical factors play also into, how the market, functions. So that part of Marxism is correct. Anyways, another criticism of the Austrian school coming out of Marxism. If value is determined by the subjective preferences of independent individuals, what in turn determines the subjective preferences? So Marx's reply, experience and social norms. Individuals are not isolated, they exist in a social context, and that is correct. This whole conflict between the subjective impulses of the individual and versus objective laws, right? So social norms exist. Social norms exist, and And I mean, what determines subjective preferences is also experiences. So the life experience of a person will influence what choices they make, right? And in fact, individuals are not isolated. They exist in a social context, Individuals exist in society. And society was created for a reason. The reason for the existence of society is to facilitate survival, right? Collective survival. Humans survive better in context of society than they do as individuals. And also, societies ensure the reproduction of humans better than, a society where there, or than forms of human existence where there is no society. So, yeah. For the Austrian School of Economics, for the Austrian school, economic laws are eternal truths based on human nature, not the dialectically determined product of an historically evolved mode of production. So, and by that they mean a particular stage in social development, right? So mode of production is defined by Marxists as a particular stage in social development, and like I said before, there was primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, Asiatic mode of production, capitalism, state capitalism, socialism, and communism, right? And some of these modes of production are controversial. Not all Marxists agree that the Asiatic mode of production was a mode of production, and not all Marxists agree that state capitalism is a mode of production. But whatever, that's a separate debate. Right, and as far as this issue about eternal truths, eternal truths, that's a metaphysical concept, and that is a flaw in the in Austrian school thinking, that they believe that there is some sort of eternal, that they believe in the forms, in the Platonic forms, that there is some sort of metaphysical realm where ideas exist in perfect form, right? And then you can then apply those perfect ideas to the reality in a fundamental way and try to make reality conform to that ideal. That's it's kind of a utopian mentality. And the concept of human nature, the concept of human nature is problematic because the concept of human nature is derived from Christian theology. The concept of human nature is, first of all, Western-centric, and it doesn't really exist in non-Western societies, not really. And it is derived from Christian theology, specifically the notion of original sin, right? That we are inclined towards sin, therefore, because Adam and Eve fell, or whatever, the fall of Adam means that we inherit then inclinations towards sin, and that and that's what this idea, and that is supposed to be the intrinsic human nature according to Christianity. Not all forms of Christianity, of course. Mormonism does not believe in the doctrine of original sin, but most self-proclaimed Christians do. So, but I mean, this notion of human nature is derived from Christian notions of original sin and sinful nature and what have you. And again, this is a Western concept. Human nature is entirely Western, so yeah, right. And let's see, for Marxists, laws are the underlying general dynamics within a particular phenomenon or system. Laws do not exist in a separate ideal realm imposed upon society from without. So, you know, Marxists do not believe in the realm of the forms, right? The Platonic realm of the forms. Marxists reject that as a form of objective idealism, similar to the idea of God. You know, if you believe that there is some sort of realm, a separate ideal realm, where, you know, ideas exist in perfect form, that's the same as believing in God, right? So, right, and very important, praxeology, and this was a theory developed by von Mises, the theory of human action based on the study of rational economic agents and their purposeful behavior, right? And the functioning of capitalism are the product of innate human nature, right? And again, this human nature concept is a concept derived from original sin theology and is Western centric. And this issue of rational economic agents, that assumes that motivation is always rational, right? And this is the fundamental flaw of liberal thinking, that liberals, and the whole issue of the reason, right? Of the reason, the concept of reason coming out of the Enlightenment, that that concept assumes that motivation is always rational, and that is not the case. So, for example, I thought of two concrete examples to point out here. One is, for example, the gay app, right? The gay app profits, right? The entrepreneurs that own the gay app, how they make their profits, you know. Sexual desire is irrational, right? Sexual desire is not something rationally determined. Sexual desire is something animalistic, right? So homosexual desire is irrational. And that does not mean that homosexual desire is wrong, just that it is irrational. Heterosexual desire is also irrational. Bisexual desire is also irrational. Sexual desire of any kind is irrational. It is not something that you rationally think about. You know, it's not something that you rationally decide to engage on. It's something that is innate to the person. You can never lie to your fantasies. See, that is why gay conversion doesn't work. I tried gay conversion therapy twice and it didn't work. Why? Because I couldn't edit my fantasies, you know? I couldn't edit. I tried everything I could to suppress fantasies, to suppress and replace fantasies, and it didn't work. Why? Because you cannot edit your sexual fantasies, you know? So sexual desire is irrational. And the gay apps satisfy the demand for homosexual sexual desire, right? Homosexuals, there is a demand among homosexuals for sex. So the homosexual downloads the gay app and goes on the gay app and hooks up, right, with another actor who is also desirous of sexual activity. So they get together and they have sex, right? And this is facilitated by the gay app. If you go in the gay app, you could have the free version or the premium version, and if you want the premium version that activates all the features, you have to pay a fee. And from that fee, the gay app entrepreneurs make their profits. So that's an example of, you know, profits being made from motivation that is not rational. And another one, and this is going to be controversial and horrible, and I know I'm gonna come across here as insensitive. Okay, I am not being insensitive when I'm pointing out to this example, but I need to point out to this example because it makes my point. The demand for child pornography, you know. Unfortunately, there is a demographic, there is a population, a small population of people, mostly men, who are, you know, have a predilection for sexual activity with children, right? I mean, and these people cannot help themselves. Okay, these people, you know, they like sex with young boys or young girls, and they cannot help themselves, right? So that objective demand creates a supply, right? Because there is unscrupulous entrepreneurs who see a profit potential there, and then they supply what this objective demand is. See, and unfortunately, that has a side effect, a horrible and tragic side effect, which is the slave trade in children, right? So you have two sets of unscrupulous actors, entrepreneurial actors, who engage in slave trade in children and manufacture of child and sale of child pornography, mostly on the dark internet. So, unfortunately, those actors profit from this business, right? Because again, there is a demographic that desires child pornography, and their desire for child pornography is irrational. It's not something that they can edit. It's something that comes from within them. They want the child pornography. They want sex with boys or girls, young boys or young girls. They can't help themselves. And actually, the reason I say this is because recently I read, because I'm really interested in this issue of child pornography, because in 2017, the hacker group Anonymous hacked some servers on the dark internet that contain like child pornography. It was the servers where the child pornography websites were selling their product from. So the hacktivists hacked this website, this servers, and put the child pornography websites out of business, right? At least temporarily. They hacked the whole system and disrupted the trade in child pornography on the dark internet. They did that. That's the reason I'm interested in this issue of child pornography, because I'm interested in efforts to disrupt the trade in child pornography using methods such as those used by the hacktivist group Anonymous in 2017. Okay, but I've read that there have been studies made with inmates in prison who are pedophiles, and studies that they have been made on them by psychiatrists. They have concluded that some of these people cannot help themselves, right? So they cannot help their desire. So the appropriate thing to do is to, yes, by all means, put the pedophiles, or the people who, pedophile is not a word that should be used. People who have a desire for sex with children who buy child pornography, yeah, it is appropriate to remove those people from society so that they will not continue to be a demand for the product, and put them in confinement. And I would say that pedophiles, or excuse me, I don't know what to call them, people who demand child pornography. Okay, pedophile is not a word that you should be using. It's a loaded word. People who demand child pornography and are captured by the authorities or whatever, they should be put away, okay? But they shouldn't be put away in a regular prison. They should be put away in a psychiatric prison designed for people who have that problem, so that they can be treated, because it is not something they can help, okay? So this is another example of an irrational desire creating a demand for a product, creating objective demand that then is met by unscrupulous actors who want to make a profit because they identify the demand and they step in and they supply it. That's the way, unfortunately, that's the way markets work, and there is also, of course, in order to be able to manufacture the child pornography, there has to be a slave trade in children, which is something horrible, horrible thing that there's, but again, yeah. The way to solve the problem is, number one, to put away the demand in a psychiatric prison, to put away the demand actor in a psychiatric prison, to disrupt the websites that sell the child pornography on the dark internet, like following the example of the hacktivist group Anonymous in February in 2017. And third, to disrupt the slave trade in children it's a hard thing to do, but I would say in that case, you would have to enlist the services of, I don't know, the intelligence community, or I don't know, the clandestine service of the of the intelligence agencies or something like that, because all that happens clandestinely. To penetrate them and disrupt them, you would have to use clandestine means. So you need to have people who are trained, police who are trained in clandestine work or whatever, to disrupt that, which is the hardest thing. But if you would to disrupt the slave trade in children, then you would significantly undermine the market, the supply of child pornography. And yeah. Now another problem is that if you take out the supply in child pornography, let's say that you shut down all the websites that sell child pornography and you shut down the slave trade in children. Great. The problem is that the objective demand for child pornography or for it's always going to be there, because this demand for child pornography comes from something irrational, an irrational desire among a certain sector of the population to have sex with children. So, see what I'm saying? So, and if they're not supplied with pornography, then these actors might actually go and, molest actual children, which would be another problem. So, yeah, I mean, it's a hard issue. It's a hard issue. Child pornography is a hard issue. But yeah, anyways, that was just an example. And I mean, I didn't mean to be insensitive here, because I'm trying to discuss economics here, but the child pornography thing is part of the red market / black market, so has to be discussed. It is an economic issue, right? Right. Anyways, yeah. In context of praxeology, there is an idealization of the isolated individual, an isolated individual romanticism, that sees the subjective viewpoint of the individual as something in a romantic way, a classic one is a colonist whose log cabin stands lonely in a primeval forest. That's like an isolated individual, right? The isolated individual, and the subjective viewpoint of the isolated individual is like a thing that, is really it's like a fixation of people who are into like anarcho-capitalism. And they, this is derived from their predilection towards the theory of the sovereign individual, right? And there is such thing as the sovereign individual movement and what have you, which is associated with anarcho-capitalism, and also associated with something called the theory of what is it called? The theory of there is the leaderless resistance, right? So yeah. Anyways, right, the whole issue of economic planning. Marxists contend that economic planning for war production during World War I and World War II proves the viability of planning. War planning boards allocated resources, and anarcho-capitalists called this so-called war socialism. But war socialism worked, especially in the United States, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, England, all these countries, their production of armaments, allocation of resources to facilitate production of armaments worked, so yeah. Because this is in reply to what von Mises called the socialist calculation debate. And von Mises held that socialism is wrong in theory and practice, that socialist planning is impossible due to the complexity of the economy. The amount of calculation required would overwhelm any centralized planning bureaucracy. And he pointed out to the inefficiency of Gosplan. And Gosplan, of course, was the planning system in the Soviet Union. It was bureaucratic planning, right? Not democratic planning, but bureaucratic planning, which is not real socialism, according to the international Marxist tendency. According to von Mises, only information provided by monetary price signals in context of a free market could efficiently allocate resources and labor, and that state regulation distorts prices and creates inefficiencies, right? That's the position of von Mises. Right. But again, the Marxists point out that economic planning for war production during World War I and World War II proves the viability of planning. So this idea that only, information provided by monetary price signals in context of a free market could efficiently allocate resources and labor is not necessarily true, not really. And, again, the success of war planning boards in many countries proves that during World War I and World War II. So another contention of von Mises in his socialist calculation debate is that rational economic activity requires private ownership of the means of production and the use of money. Well, maybe. Private ownership of the means of production is not necessary for rational economic activity. Okay, because you could have cooperative forms of ownership, such as in anarcho-syndicalism, where they posit the voluntary association of cooperative groups. It would be an economic system based entirely on voluntary association into cooperatives and interaction between cooperatives. So, and that would, not require private ownership of the means of production, but workers' control of the means of production. So that could also be rationally organized. That would be a form of rational economic activity. And again, this issue of rational economic activity, which von Mises points out, again, von Mises assumes that motivation and calculation is always rational, and that is not the case. Motivation and calculation is not always rational, okay, or it doesn't always proceed from rational premises, as is the case with, for example, sexual desires. Sexual desire that lead people to demand the services of a gay app, or unfortunately, lead people to demand, the supply of child pornography, These are irrational desires that, demand being satisfied by a product that, actors supply. I am not equating the entrepreneurs who supply gay apps with the unscrupulous criminals who supply child pornography. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that these actors are supplying a market that is premised upon irrational desire, because sexual desire is irrational, it's not rational. So that's what I'm saying here. Rational economic activity, I don't know. I'm not sure about the word rational here, so yeah, anyhow. Yeah, okay, so that's, it's 37 minutes already. Okay, so that is section B of part 1 of the series of videos analyzing Marxism versus Libertarianism, which should have been called Marxism versus Anarcho-Capitalism because it's dealing with the Austrian school. But anyways, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.